Have you ever asked yourself, theology nerds, what would happen if Jack Caputo, Peter Rollins got in an argument about philosophical anthropology and one told the other one they were full of it? Well, that's going to happen on this podcast, because this is the Homebrewed Christianity podcast where nerds come to just nerd out with their geek out. This is a live podcast from Subverting the Norm. On it, you're going to hear from Jack Caputo and Pete. But first, you're going to get to hear the most amazing conversation I got to have with my sidekick, Jonnie, with Catherine Keller. That's all in this live Homebrewed Christianity edition from Subverting the Norm. So buckle your theological safety belts. That's not even a buckling noise. I don't know. Anyway, that's about to happen. But first, let me tell you that all sorts of goodness is happening on the internet. And people say to me, they're like, Tripp, how come I find out later that you're doing this or that or whatnot? I'm sorry. The main way for you to know everything that's going on with Homebrewed Christianity, like where live events are, where we're going to be doing some live streaming things, so you can do that when we're having really cool junk going on with the member group, all that kind of stuff. Just go to Homebrewed and sign up for the email list. On the email list, you'll get a little email that says, hey, here's all the people that were on the podcast this week. Here's the live events that are coming up. Here's some cool stuff you can win from some free stuff if you do that. Here's blah, 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 blah. It's like a newsletter for people that like audiological, theological goodness. And you'll also get updates about all the cool stuff that's happening with the Homebrewed community, which right now, sometime near the time that this is going out, I'm going to be doing like a day-long workshop with Jörg Rieger on Jesus. It's a theology nerd boot camp. Jörg Rieger, like author of Christ and Empire. Jörg Rieger, theologian at SMU who's about to take a new post at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Jörg Rieger, like theologian, German theologian who is also a liberation theologian. That's right, Jörg Rieger, who's one of my favorite people out on the podcast. Anyway, we're doing a one-day workshop. It's on Jesus, Theology Nerd Bootcamp. If you're a member of the Homebrewed Christianity community, if you're like an elder, you're a bishop, or whatnot, then you'll be getting delivered to you very soon the edited audio from that whole day-long workshop. In addition to, in less than a week from when I'm recording this intro, you'll be joining Philip Clayton and I for a walk through the text of Plato's Republic. On top of that, you can get all sorts of back catalog goodness from high gravity classes in the past, all sorts of stuff. Anyway, we're really working on building that community thing. So if you're interested in supporting the podcast, getting free and extra audiological ingredients, giving input, joining a couple experiments like an intro to theology class, like an intro more than an intro for people that listen to this, like, I kind of know what's going on, but I want to know what's even more going on. Like an intro for a novice theology class. We're going to make an audiological theology dictionary or encyclopedia with question people topics from the Homebrewed community. Oh man, I'm yawning. That's because I'm recording lots of intros before I fly on a plane to go talk about things. Anyway, and the last thing we're going to do, we're going to do monthly blabs, like Ask the Theologian. And so, like, each time, it's not just going to be, like, me answering questions. Me, Tony Jones, the good doctor, Daniel Kirk will join some. Tony Jones joins some. And then all sorts of different people that are writing in the Homebrewed Christianity series for Fortress Press. They're going to join, like, Grace, Jesus, and Kim, Donna Bowman, Bill Leonard, Jeff Pugh, Adam Clark, Diane Lipset. I don't know if she's going to join yet, but that I'm just saying it in case she's listening, because she said she thought she might be able to. And she's awesome. Like, literally. When that New Testament book comes out in the Homebrewed series, it's going to be that amazing. And you should just go ahead and get it. I love Diane. She's awesome. It's rare that a human being is like an amazing scholar, a great teacher, high-quality human being, person you want on your committee and stuff at church. Like the church Alicia worked at while you're in divinity school, Diane Lipset was on like volunteer community stuff. Her sons are awesome. Anyway, okay, I might just be a little excited. She's writing the New Testament guide. Anyway, Anyway, you can find out more about the whole guide series, homebrewedguides.com. You can pre-order the whole thing. Super cheap. Get tons of free stuff, like $800 worth of classes. So even if the books were complete fails, you got a good deal. See? Just saying. Could be worse. Could be worse. Now, this is what's about to happen. Live podcast. I'm going to talk to Catherine Keller with my buddy Johnny. The part that got edited out, Tripp was crying. It was an emotional time. Just know that. Then, you'll find out more about that later on the podcast. Not this podcast, future podcast. But anyway, then Jack and Pete come up, and I actually had a whole thing scheduled for them with thesis statements from a battle in the Reformation area between Stiletto and Calvin. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It's a fight over philosophical anthropology and theology. Like, how depraved is a person? How do you understand their reason, their twisted will, and things like that? And I was going to have them respond to these different topics. But the only problem was that once the question of Jack's problem with Pete came up, there was no facilitating. As in, they kind of went back and forth. And at some point, Jack does use body language at his feelings about a certain person who likes the con too much. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but things happen. Alright? Alright. Go to homebrewed.com. If you don't subscribe to the show. Give us a review on iTunes. And most of all, if you want to keep up with everything, just sign up for the email list. Every week you'll get a little email. It tells you who's got interviewed on what shows, when live things are happening, when you can join a live stream, join stuff. Alright? Okay. Peace out.
Ours is a time of social and spiritual upheaval and a desperate need of a path toward healing and reconciliation. The Drew Theological School can set you on this path. The Drew Theological School trains leaders, scholars, activists, and pastors to be rooted in Christian tradition, innovative in spiritual reflection, and courageous in pursuing justice. Through studies in one of the 6 degree programs offered at the Drew Theological School, you will become the rooted, innovative, and courageous agent of healing and reconciliation our world so desperately needs. To apply for one of these 6 degree programs at the Drew Theological School, visit their website at www.drew.edu/theological or contact their admissions office at 973-408-3111.
Thank you all for coming to Homebrewed Christianity at Subvert the Norm. My name is Tripp, and this is Jonnie.
Sidekicking. Tripp, I have a moment. I have an inventive interruption.
An inventive interruption.
Before you do anything that you do, some people have they haven't planned it, but it's come upon us. Somewhat of as people have been saying today, somewhat of maybe a kairos moment. And it isn't really a celebration of you, not just of the fact that you've released a book, but all that you have put into it and all that you've put into these events and these things. Your good friend Charlie, the brewer of these ales, has officially released the 3rd of these theologian and philosopher ales, and that is the Tripp IPA, an IPA as nice as Jesus. So Tripp, welcome to the likes of. You've got Jack's Deconstructor Ale, Catherine's Multiplicity, and now you have your own Tripp IPA, an IPA as nice as Jesus.
Oh,
so let's just clap for that. My God.
And Charlie did make the beer, so thank you very much. Charlie is my favorite Southern Baptist deacon. I always like to mention it just because, many of us, when we think of Southern Baptists, we don't think of wonderful homebrewers who will take some processed theology-inspired beer recipes from California, brew them in Oklahoma, and drive them down to subvert the norm. But, Philippians 4:13. See, Baptists knew that is an affirmation of the ability to do all things through Christ. Namely,
and all of us silent were just like, what does that say?
Yeah, they were like,
I've never memorized a verse.
Why are you quoting Paul, Tripp? Anyway, so this is Jonnie. Jonnie is a friend of mine. He made the poor mistake of quitting being a guitar player in a rock and roll band and studying philosophy.
Yep. Wisdom?
Well, we'll see. We're excited about tonight. We're going to talk to just Catherine Keller. So she has the initials of JC. Then, as you heard this morning, Jack has been looking forward to the chance to witness to our crypto-Calvinist Irishman, Peter Rollins, and I've been trying to witness to him for years. So much, we moved in together, and when he was asleep, I would just chant psalms over his sleeping body. And the whole time I was writing the Jesus book, he would go out probably doing horribly radical things and come back, and I'm just got the New Testament out, drinking in the garage. And he's like, why do you have all these Jesus books? And I was like, just trying to save your soul. So Jack's going to do it tonight. Praise the Lord. Catherine?
Tripp.
What was the first norm that got subverted for you as a theologian?
Well, as a theologian, origins are very elusive for me. Mm-hmm. I'm always resisting any moment of creatio ex nihilo. So I'm not sure what the first norm was, but because of this conversation, I'm going to tumble into race, because it would be a contender. And just to say, I mean, for me, the race thing comes up oddly, but in a way that I've been realizing is not at all irrelevant to what we're discussing about race. And J. Cameron Carter's book, Race, has helped me make the connection.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about it tomorrow, so I'm not going to do the lecture now. I'm going to talk much too much tomorrow. But just the basic moves that he's making, that is to say that racialization happens in the West through the racialization of Jews. There wasn't race before that. There was ethnicity. So race, and therefore racism, emerges in the production in the early medieval period of the Jew as the racial other, but that could only happen on the basis of the disconnection of Jesus from his Jewish body, and therefore of Christ from that Jewish Jesus. Hence the high Christology. Okay, so that's theological, and that's about a loss of Judaism. Well, the name on, it's hard to, the name on my birth certificate is Cohen. But my Jewish father had split fairly early. I got to know him later, and that was traumatic for my mother, and I look like him. I look a lot more Jewish than anyone else in my family. And so I did grow up with weird outbursts of anti-Semitism against me. So I have a bit of an inkling of what racism might feel like just from that vulnerable early period. But then for me, becoming a Christian theologian has always had everything to do with the reclaiming of the Jewish Jesus, that then drives a whole reclamation of embodiment and helps me to struggle in meaningful ways with the race background of my family. On my mother's side, that white is the last name, yes. And we also had the story of how the slaves in our plantations, we also had a big one, in Kentucky. and how those slaves, when they were freed, kept the name white because we treated them well. Well, it's the same story. But there are other stories too, that my stepfather lost his job, also coincidentally in Kentucky, though that was just for a year, because of preaching about how we are gathered together for the great hour of segregation. So there was pride about anti-racism in my family at that stage, and there was nostalgia for the Southern aristocracy, the Southern slaveocracy. And there was bitterness in that whole family line about the fall of the South and, the sort of frantic migration north. And then there was the alcoholic, dysfunctional character of my grandfather and my mother, the white family. And that just goes on back. And that's why I'm drinking water right now, though I really enjoyed the first glass. The parable of the yeast takes on a whole new meaning around Tripp. Yeah, so there's that reclamation of a Jewish sense of embodiment always driving my sense of theology and connecting me in uncomfortable and transforming ways with questions of white-black relation in our land. But it obviously doesn't stay right there with something about the historical Jewish Jesus for me. My theology goes, as you know, mystical and probably excessively so, but it tunes into what Alden Pollard is talking about with Endarkenment and his beautiful book on Thurman's mysticism. Really amplifies that trope of the brilliant darkness, right? The luminous darkness, which Thurman seems to get from the story of a deep sea dive of a student of his, but which, as you probably know, is the phrase that is used to exegete the story of the dark cloud that encompasses God and Moses together over Mount Sinai, that then Gregory of Nyssa interprets, creating negative theology in the 3rd, 4th century, and using the phrase, the luminous darkness, for the first time. Right? So there is a profoundly mystical, apophatic darkness that moves me deeply and that embodies itself really kind of strangely in this actual material race history.
My question was going to be, how does your kind of process mystical orientation change the discussion for you in terms of, or inform your thought of this race thing, but you just went right into it, which is beautiful. But I guess my question is, what does that mean for embodiment and the question of race? Because even in the way, I was thinking of this when Alton was talking, what Tripp is struggling with is that is somehow his identity, though it is his past. And he needs to move beyond that, but he knows that he is still embroiled in it or entangled in it or still a part of it that wants to become more. That very feeling seems, for me, a ripe place to think in a process way. How does process for you help you think about those questions? How does maybe even that kind of ontology inform or confuse or propel that conversation for you? Mm-hmm.
Well, it does in a very lively way do so for me right this time of year when I'm teaching the intro to theology at a seminary in which, our class has a very strong proportion of African American students. And, it's a passionate struggle because I'm exposing them to disturbing new kinds of theology, process theology. They're coming out of very deeply evangelical Pentecostal traditions. And so there are amazing conversations that develop. And where I think the resonance kicks in for a lot of my African American students with process theology is kind of where it kicked in for me. It's a sense of the entire past of your world, that is the world of the influences upon you, but that really is a universe of influences upon you, not just, mommy at birth or your professors, but, your genetic codes and your plantation ancestors, strangers on a street, the quantum weirdness making you up and connecting you to other parts of the universe, all that. And so, we can really tangle in that zone about the way we're always needing to reconstitute ourselves, and we need to do it. No one else is going to do it for us, but we're reconstituting ourselves out of all of that past that really keeps flowing into us and forming us, and we don't get rid of it. We don't overcome it in process thought. That's the ontology. You don't get free of your past. If you have been abused, you will always have been abused. You will bear those scars unto the resurrection, right? They will show. However, you can, with grace and a little help from your friends, radically shift the meaning of that abuse. Yeah, so it can become a significant resource for your transformative work in the world. And so you can lament it and help others to lament it, and there is then also great joy in the kinds of alternative community that form. So I think there's a lot of resonance on the need to just keep working on the racism and the sexism and the heterosexism and the classism and the speciesism. Judith Butler's embarrassed, etc. And all those other isms don't flush out racism when we're focusing there. And so I'm always getting help from my students about how to not lose focus, because I tend, to go multiple.
Speaking of
but then I can help them think through the complex entanglements, and process thought really might be the best systematic model that there is for thinking through how we are continuously becoming out of the matrix of our relations, and yet at every moment there's a flash of new possibility. Might be impossible to actualize it, but there's a little bit of elbow room in the universe at any given moment, even for an electron, right? There's indeterminacy.
It's really helpful and challenging, because I think even in some of the ways that the modern or the trite or the unthinking modern thought of liberation or emancipation is that it must end in some kind of autonomy, right? So it makes me think of, I don't know what to call it, but white idiocy of thinking that dealing with the problem would mean that at some point we're supposed to get to these people, or people that have been oppressed, that have removed themselves from that past and can see themselves as a strong autonomous individual. And this idea of realizing that can't be what liberation means, and to still be entangled in it.
Yeah, we don't become exceptions to our past.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's powerful. I mean, it just makes me think about this surprisingly, kind of personal, relational moment that happened, with you and Alton, is made sense for by me in just kind of the way you're talking about it now. And that's helpful.
Right, because all that, I hear what you're saying. That's very helpful, because all that past keeps rolling on, and we're not disentangleable.
Right.
From it.
And Tripp hasn't shirked it, and Alton hasn't said it didn't happen, and he hasn't become,
but it's a singular and fresh moment of relationship that kind of cuts through and opens up a profound new awareness of that past, and then a pulsation of new possibility of what you're going to do about it.
It makes me think of one of the coolest parts of being grad students is, especially at Claremont, is watching what happens when John Cobb's friends get together and the cool conversations you overhear at a table. And there was this gathering of leaders of the United Methodist Church, and then, if you're me, the books you read and dream about. And there was this amazing conversation between two AME bishops and a United Methodist bishop, Marjorie Suhaki and Monica Coleman. And for some reason, I was at the table and listening. And I remember Monica, and it's in Making a Way Out of No Way, which is a beautiful book. She was responding to a discussion among bishops about writing specific prayers of confession when atrocities that come from your very particular community have anniversaries. And they're discussing whether or not you could do it. And the oddity of the United Methodist Church sending a prayer of confession to just certain churches and not others. And Monica paused and said, well, the reason we need very specific prayers of confession is because then very deep guilt emerges, and that's when forgiveness with transformation becomes possible. And there was like this pause, and they're like, and the bishops were like, oh, that's beautiful. And she's like, I read it in this book called Fall to Violence by Marjorie Suhaki. And Marjorie, I looked at her and was like, well, I had no idea that's what, you had read in the book. Like, obviously she knew what she wrote, but she was like, I'd never thought of it. That move from progression to guilt to forgiveness that includes transformation. And what it opened up when that table went back to what does theology within congregations look like is the challenge to pray prayers of confession so specific that congregations asked to hold guilt deep enough it's transformative and an opportunity for grace rather than anxiety about this generic kind of depressing version of sin. And as a Southerner, usually guilt and all those things were mostly related to drinking, chewing, and sex. So the fact it could be related to the kind of the depth and particularities of your community was a real liberating thing, like the particularity of the confession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's powerful. If that confession can somehow arise out of the community as opposed to being laid on them, in which case they're just going to shut down and become even more racist. That would be really powerful. And one thing that Monica's teacher, Karen Baker Fletcher, she's also taught by Marjorie, has emphasized in her Dancing with God, which is also a womanist theology, is the importance of thinking sin together with Han. Andrew Song Park's idea, a Korean term Han, talking about really original Han, as perhaps more original than original sin, original suffering, that's a suffering that's related to a violation, a sense of injustice, a festering, ressentiment comes attached to it until it's exposed and begins to be worked through. But to understand that our sins are coming out of Han, that there's a way that racism in those particular Southern congregations you're thinking about has also roots in families where there is the violation being laid on the children. The children aren't born as racists. They're kind of made into it. That's something Tandeka worked a lot on. Another African-American thinker who found Claremont thought indispensable, but really wanted to emphasize that there's a kind of wounding of children that makes them white, and then allows racism to grow. And I think that view, combined with the sense of Karen Baker Fletcher's womanist reading of the Korean idea of Han, it helps maybe to actually open up, that confessional vulnerability that you want, as opposed to just trying to stimulate white guilt, which either creates the really dangerous reactionary defensivenesses or the liberal wallowing that goes nowhere. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So much.
It's not, by the way, an accident that two of the major womanist theologians, Monica Coleman, Karen Baker Fletcher, are process theologians. And that's something to do with working out the intersectionality of being African American women dealing with sexism, as well as racism, and just aware of the multiplicity.
So one more question that popped in my head when you were talking about how, in a sense, the particularity of Jesus' Jewish flesh re-inscribes like Christology to our materiality and our situation, and how our ability to de-Jesusify Jesus' Jewishness was a problem in Christology. And then there's this other move that happens in John Cobb, where this move from wisdom, logos, Sophia, into creative transformation, where he describes those art where it dissipates. Can you describe that tension of Jesus both provoking, dealing with the extreme particularities of your fleshliness, and also the de-Christocentrizing of Christology in creative transformation?
So the one in the many, the particular in the universal.
Yeah,
really,
one question.
It was really,
and then it increases by one.
And it really is the Jewish Jesus on the ground and the cosmic logos. Yes, I can. But on the other hand, it's late, and you've been listening to talks all day. I have a feeling if I read your new book, I could do it.
I don't know.
Much better. I'll just say it is Cobb's Christology from when is that, 1974, that I read as it came out. I was sitting on the floor in the basement library at seminary, the bookstore, and just was hooked. Christ in Pluralistic World, and felt, I actually could be a Christian theologian. My feminism, this is the early 70s, was tending to totally contradict that possibility, and the contradiction dissolved into what Whitehead calls a complex contrast as I read that book. And so I went to study then with him. So that book does really emphasize in historical vividness, and with the help of Malraux's account of art history and the disappearance of Christ from Western art, the disappearing of the image, which Cobb interprets as itself inspired by Christ, the disappearance of the Christ. That hooked my artistic dysfunctional background. But it's the combination of that very fully human Jewish activist Jesus with the interpretation of the Christ symbol in terms of creative transformation that really worked for me, so that Christ as the Logos incarnate is interpreting Logos, that in John, cosmic principle through which all things are created, that word, as the principle of process itself, the principle of all creative transformation. And so to understand that in Jesus, that principle of creative transformation was embodied in a unique but not exclusive way, in a distinctive but not triumphant way, worked for me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well,
very high, very low Christology.
Well, you can get high and low in Claremont any day you want. So, if everyone could thank Catherine and welcome Pete and Jack. Hey, Charlie. This is like the longest it's been without seeing you in a while, Pete.
Yeah, I've missed you. So I was on a plane and I was running late and Tripp texts me and goes, "Are you going to get here in time?" And I'm like, "Absolutely. I hear Jack's going to tear someone apart at your event. I'm not going to miss that." So here I am. It's me.
So this morning, Pete,
I heard
when you weren't there, the call ruptured in my soul, and I felt the need to again shun my Calvinist upbringing. That it finally made sense to me why I was haunted by your presence on a consistent basis. It was because total depravity lurked underneath your bones.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, what would be a fun way of having Jack and Pete talk, but to pick something where you disagree that's so specific, it reveals the fact that there's not a whole lot else for you to disagree about. So what I thought would be fun is to time you each taking turns talking to each other like a good family therapist, and begin where this conflict, your crypto-Calvinism and how this rupture that's come in this relationship that's been so fruitful, and we just wanted to reconcile. And I agree with Jack, and we just felt more comfortable in those early books. No, I bought them all. Don't worry. And I support you for who you are, Pete. But, I thought you really should listen to Jack more often.
Yeah, that's good advice. That is good advice.
And so I thought I would give you the opportunity of someone that's meant so much in your life for you to have 2 minutes to, just state his concern about your position in terms where he would recognize his own voice.
Okay.
Like, we don't need to critique. We don't need anything. What we need is for you to demonstrate your ability to listen to your superior, inspiring elder and to hear his own opinion about philosophical anthropology without being destroyed in your Lacanian excursions.
So you want me to say what I think Jack would say, how it would sound to him?
Yeah, and in a completely hospitable way that demonstrates your attentive listening.
Yeah, but Jack's just a happy guy. He thinks when a child's born, it's like, oh, this is beautiful, and it's like goo goo gaga. It's like inside out, right? It's like wonderful. When a child's born, I think they're screaming in agony, in terror, going, "What is this I've been born into? Get me back into the womb." They're just having ontic shock. So there you go. That's, in a nutshell, that was less than 2 minutes. He's joy, I'm sadness.
I'm just saying, like, for active listening exercise, your grade's very low because could you persuade us that Jack's position is at least semi-reasonable to the point that Jack heard his critique and articulation of you owned? Because I'll tell you what Pete does. Let's imagine that you had a small daughter who's itty-bitty and cute, and you're all playing with her on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden, Cora, that's my daughter. It's arbitrary. This Platonic principle of identity that gets picked up in Heidegger, Derrida, and Whitehead screams profusely for 30 seconds. What does Pete do? Finally, she's ontus. It's ontic shock.
Yeah. That's the truth when she's crying.
I know, but see, that was me trying to describe your position in a way you resonated.
That's
now,
also the time when I leave the house, by the way. Go like, that's the truth. I'm going to the pub. You can deal with her. Yeah. I mean, and Jack said this in April in Belfast. He said, "I know what you're about. You're a crypto-Calvinist. It's all, you've got this lack at the core of all of your thing, So, but I'm going like, yeah, it's true. I'm not crypto-Calvinist. I'm through and through Calvinist. Absolutely. I hold up my hands. I think that's the only way to understand the interesting bit of Christianity.
All right, Jack. So, now I know that your new book title is taken from Paul, but like any good Calvinist, you managed to only read Paul and appropriate the whole entire biblical narrative through Paul's rather depressing scheme of anthropology. So how like how would you describe to Pete that 2 or 3 seconds that his position seems plausible despite the strict differences? Because it's important in a good counseling session to hear the other.
We both begin with the principle that you get the best results by facing up to the worst. All right, that's what I meant by radical hermeneutics. My critique of classical hermeneutics is that it's a crypto-Hegelianism. It's got this underlying narrative that the Spirit is guiding things to its telos, so that there's a kind of divine underwriting of the process of history, so that despite all the twists and turns and the writing straight with crooked lines, underneath it all, the process will reach its telos, because that's what God is. Right? Now, I say, well, look, that shows up in Gadamer. Only Gadamer doesn't. I think Gadamer remains within the orbit of Hegel. Right? I don't know if you're ready for all this stuff at this hour of the night. I mean, this is a terrible way to treat people who you're giving good beer to.
If you didn't know that evangelists regularly bribe people with pizza in order to tell them that they're sacks of shit God wants to torture eternally, this is one step better.
All right. So I say, well, look, Gadamer stays within the orbit of Hegel. Gadamer he calls it tradition, but it's a thinly veiled version of what Hegel called Geist. And what you got to do is look at tradition. My pyro-theology, because I went back and when I wrote a thing about Pete a couple of weeks ago about pyro-theology, and I looked back into some of my own stuff where I used the figure of fire. And I discovered, actually, I used it in an important way, because I said, what I mean by radical hermeneutics is submitting hermeneutics to the fire of deconstruction. That is to say, torching the latent Hegelian metaphysics that I still think is in Gadamer's notion of tradition and Hegel's Tillich's notion of culture. I think even Tillich's notion of culture is there's still that metaphysical foundation for things. And so I said, what I mean by radical hermeneutics is facing up to the worst. There's nobody's guaranteeing anything. This process does not have a telos. It doesn't. Nobody's assuring it's going to get there. Nobody's writing straight with crooked lines. This is for better or for worse, and there are no guarantees. That's where you and I are together, completely together. But the question is, the only reason to be doing what we do is because we believe something. The only reason to not go out and make a serious amount of money, right? I mean, there's a lot of very smart people in this room and in the world in which we circulate, and in academics, who could make a lot of money. Probably.
Perhaps.
Some people are now leaving the room. It's like, what? I can what? I can make lots of money? Don't tell them, Jack. They don't know.
Listen, I've heard you sing. You could make a serious amount of money. So what are we doing? What are we doing? There's something in which we have a deep and fundamental faith. Now, we all have figured out it's not the faith that they taught us in 4th grade. Right? It's not that. It's something much more profound, much more enigmatic, much more unnameable, much more elusive. But it is something that we affirm. Mm-hmm. Affirmation is first and last and always. Now, Zizek is smart. You know what?
That's very tweetable.
Controversial.
dot.
He's clever. He's clever. You know what? Here's a Whitehead anecdote. You know, Whitehead and Russell co-authored the Principia Mathematica. And I once heard the story, and they went very different directions, right? As you all know better than I. Russell in the direction of a logical empiricism, and Whitehead into speculative metaphysics. And I heard the story once that Whitehead saw the big picture of the axiomatization of mathematics, and he let Russell do the proofs. Yeah, let Russell do the proofs. But he had the big picture, right? So what we are interested in is not contractible to a simple set of beliefs. What I think Zizek does is, I think Zizek is smart, like Russell was smart. But he corrupts Hegel. He corrupts it because he makes this very clever move that the double negation is no, there never was anything. That's bullshit. Exegetically, and he knows this, exegetically, that's not Hegel. Philosophically, more importantly, it's bullshit. The no is in the affirmation of yes. The no, I'm sorry, is in the service of yes. Bien, oui, oui. Yes. Yes, I said, yes. Now, what I call radical hermeneutics never meant to be anything when I spoke about speaking up, facing up to the worst. Never meant to be anything but yes. Now, my only concern with Pete's later work.
And only people that love him have an only concern.
Should feel good. That should feel good, Pete. That should feel good.
I know, like leaving your toenails out after you've trimmed them. It's like you wake up in the morning and you're like, I succeeded. Perhaps.
Now I've forgotten what my only concern is. My concern is, as I said this morning, the Zizekian tonality. Like, is Catherine Moody here? Is she here?
Yes.
No, she went home. She went
home, went to bed.
She taught at 9 a.m. this morning.
No, she's here.
Yeah.
No, she's gone.
Here.
No.
She's at the hotel, I think.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, we'll wait.
You know, when I listened to Catherine this morning, she threw me off. I mean, the thing was so goddamn bleak. It was so hopeless. And I said to her afterwards, I said, look, I understand the notion of hopelessness. The difference between a reasonable expectation and hope is that a reasonable expectation is reasonable. But hope is when you reach that point of hopelessness and you still hope. Like, be realistic but demand the impossible. That's what hope is. Right? So the logic of hopelessness, the logic of negation, is the point of facing up to the worst. is in order to burn through, there's this powerful image that you use, to burn through the bullshit to this deeper structure of hope and expectation, which is not held captive by idols and chimera and false promises. Mm-hmm. And I think Zizek is ultimately a destructive force, because I think he ultimately is preaching what, I think is a kind of stoicism. The life sucks, and being faithful to life is to just deal with it. I think he's wrong about that.
Yeah.
And I think that the structure of hope and the structure of temporality defies that.
Yeah.
And I'm just worried. I just worry.
We're all worried about Peter. Yeah. So
is this this is an intervention? Is this an intervention?
Look, Pete. What I thought.
This is an intervention, Pete. Is what
You're right. You're right.
I know that. If you remember back to your Pentecostal days in America on the frontier, Pentecostal preachers, they always had a special bench. It was called the anxious bench. Not anxiety like the first half of Volume 2 is systematic for Paul Tillich, but anxiety in a very different way. But
I should be doing the Shizak thing.
Rub your nose.
Yes. Yes. But I do have to say something in response.
Yes, please.
Yes. No, well, Tripp, far be it from me to shut you up. I have tried for years. I'm not able to.
No. That's Pete. That's the only reason he has me up here. So you're doing my job.
So you're...
Get your word while Jax is still fresh. I'm going to make the executive call.
Okay. So a few things. One is I do like this idea of the negation of negation. And what I take from that, and what I take Shizak meaning from that is, if you have a debt, the university a certain amount of money. This debt is a nothingness. Debt is the manifestation of a nothing that, can be filled with money. Now, if I have a debt to Jack, that nothingness binds me to Jack. I am bound to Jack. If, Tripp goes and pays the debt, whatever, that's the Christian, that's what I've heard in churches. Jesus pays the debt. But for me, what's interesting about Christianity is it forgives a debt. To forgive a debt isn't to pay a debt. To forgive a debt is to render the nothingness nothing. So the year of Jubilee is not to say the debt is paid, but the debt is nothing. So it's it's a double negation. It's the making nothing of nothingness. So, my argument is simple, that to be human is to be a being that is human, is to have nothingness as part of that. Sartre famously talks about in itself and for itself. So there's the in itself, facticity, just things, stuff. And then there's the for itself, which is a being that can conceptualize itself as a being. And to be able to have, to be able to conceptualize me in opposition to this cup and in opposition to myself means there's a distance, a lack. There's something, that this just constitutive being human. This lack, that's what I mean by original sin, original lack. There is a lack that is part of being. And to have the courage to be, to use Tillich's language, the courage to be is the courage to render that lack powerful, to render that lack meaningless. I live in LA, right? So I'm scarily, I think it's going to make me happy, so I'm really worried. But also, everywhere you turn in LA, people are laboring under the unhappy desire to be happy. They're laboring under the tyranny of happiness, of a non-castrated other who is happy and content and doesn't have lack in their being. So my argument is simply the negation of negation is not to try to fill that lack with something like the American dream or the BMW or religion, or to fill that in some way, but rather is to render it nothing. And so Shizak talks about psychoanalysis. There is no psychosynthesis. You don't need psychosynthesis, because psychoanalysis is psychosynthesis. By embracing, by analyzing, by breaking apart, by making peace with the lack, there is no second stage. The embrace of the lack is what robs it of its sting.
But why say make peace with the lack? I mean, well, first of all, why describe it? Well, all right, describe it as a lack. Let's leave that on the table. Instead of describing it as making peace with the lack, why not describe it in terms of the joy of the open-ended, unfinished character of our journey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the lack is pure gain, because the whole point is, here's an example with your kid, Elgin, right? Hey, Elgin, yeah.
I love him.
Elgin said to me once, he said, and I think he said it to all of us, he said, it's terrible being a kid. You have to have all these rules. You always have to, everyone's telling you what to do. And in school, you go and everyone's telling you what to do. I would love to, be an adult and have people not tell me what to do. I mean, crazy. But what he was fantasizing was kind of like a time where he didn't, or a place or a location where he wouldn't have to obey these rules. He's given up something to be part of the family. What he's given up is, all of these rules and regulations. But actually it's a loss that's pure gain. It's a sacrifice that actually brings him into the community and makes him part of the family. In the same way, Lacan's point, I think, is that the lack that we feel when we're, as human beings, is the very thing that calls us into being. It's a loss that is pure gain. And the only problem is when people come along and say, that they say that we can fill that lack. This is the problem. Whenever they say, here's the vending machine of life, all these products in it. What I'm saying is, no, we take a sledgehammer to the vending machine. That's the Christological move. And so it's death for life. So, I don't know if that was in any way coming close to what you asked, because I forget.
Well, we would hate to have a synthesis, because that would just not negate the negation appropriately in the right way. And
yeah. Oh, I know what I was saying, because you were saying, why not see this as joyful and wonderful? That's what I think the task is to transform how we relate to this lack. I think part of the difference between Jack and I is that he's kind of healthy. This lack doesn't drive him in a negative way. And that's where I think I'm trying to get people to, and myself to, because I know that I have sometimes thought of relationships as going to be the thing that will make me whole and complete. I know some people have thought it was money. Some people have thought it was religion. And there are some people like Jack who's like, just enjoy life. And I'm like, yeah, I've got nothing to say. That's what I'm trying to get you to. My thing is many of us aren't there. And there is an ethical dimension to this. So I'm saying ontologically, we have a lack. Then that attaches ontically to things. So we attach it to objects. And then ethically, the consequence of that is we pursue them to the destruction of ourselves and other people.
It's the language of lack that is partly bothering me. I would rather have the language of finitude, potency, possibility, potentiality, unfinished. Lack means that something is missing that's supposed to be there.
Not original lack. Original means comes first. Original sin. I'm a big original sin guy. Yeah. Original blessing, that's just a fantasy.
Original sin is in my bullshit category. One of Nietzsche's objections to Christianity was, he said, Christianity depends upon the notion that nature has brought forth this sick creature, of which it is the cure. Right? And I think psychoanalysis sounds like that. It's brought forth something sick, something lacking, of which it is the cure.
But the lack is pure gain. The lack is a victory.
There's probably.
Have you ever had a deep breath occupy that much space?
Lack is the absence of something that is supposed to be there.
Not
potency, possibility is not properly described as a lack. Potency is possibility, its openness, its futurity. It's not the lack of something that's supposed to be there. It's not supposed to be there yet. Well, our being is always already unfinished. From the moment of birth all the way, even when you're 75 years old, you still feel the same way. The future is open. Life is
What was that?
An intervention.
Moment of potency, sorry.
Life is unfinished. It's open-ended. It's possibility. It's potency. It's not a lack that we're going to treat as a gain. That's a misdescription of it, in my view. It's beginning. It's natality. It's possibility. It's potency.
And Bonhoeffer agrees with Jack.
Unless you think there's some goddamn thing that ruined everything, that somehow or another cut into the substance of this thing and destroyed it in some way. And then you say, well, let's treat that destruction, let's treat that cut as a gain. Mm-hmm. Let's act as if it's not. It's just natality. It's just beginning. It's just potency. And life is always in that condition. And why drape this in such dark garments?
Yeah. By the way, you had later Bonhoeffer, who I love, totally agrees with Jack here. He calls it secularized Methodism. He thinks that the existentialists and the psychoanalysts are just kind of always trying to give you good news by first making you feel bad. And his whole thing is, why are we always looking for cobwebs in a house before we can enjoy it? Why are we always looking for the dirt before we can love a flower? So, I can appreciate that, Yeah.
This is Gadamer. This is Gadamer, by the way. Make the position of the other strong.
Oh, that's such a. That's such a.
Is it Plato and Aristotle? I mean, is that really what we're getting back to here? This.
Laurel and Hardy? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, really though, it
is Plato and Aristotle. It is. In Plato, there's this structural gap between the ideal and the real, and Aristotle said it's potency.
And Zizek doesn't call himself a Platonist, but he calls himself, radically rationalist in one way or another. Would fit more in that strain than your Aristotelian sense.
But let me say this. I said it this morning, and I'll say it again. I am, by birth, by origin, Catholic. I don't know how many people still count me Catholic. I don't know if I count myself as Catholic. But the background figure in the Catholic tradition is Aristotle, who had an upbeat and sanguine notion of the material world. Didn't think that it was a copy of something or an imitation of something or a weak version of something else that it ought to be. He didn't think it was a lack. He thought it was robustly real. The reason that Aquinas preferred Aristotle to Plato was that Aquinas was a Christian. And to be a Christian is to be an incarnationalist. And to be an incarnationalist is to affirm the integrity and the robustness and the holiness of the material world. Not that it was an imitation or a copy of anything, or that it was in some deep way flawed. He didn't think it was flawed, he just thought it was finite, and it needed to be perfected by grace. He didn't think it was broken and sick and guilty. He wasn't Augustine, he wasn't Paul and Luther and Augustine and Kierkegaard and Barth. He didn't belong to that tradition. Aquinas went back to Aristotle, where things are sensible, material, robustly real, finite, and full of potentiality. None of this sick, dark, broken, cut. And that's what I heard when I didn't say it. I never said total depravity. It was, who was it? It was somebody in your Belfast group.
It was maybe you, Amy.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well,
and I want to affirm, by the way, the majority of what Jack's saying. The only slight difference is that I want to say, well, it's only sick and problematic when we interact with it in the wrong way. That the lack is only problematic. Like in capitalism, whenever we think that a certain amount of money or something will fill it, then that causes all manner of problems. But that actually, if we're able to make peace with, and for Paul Tillich, there were 3 ways that lack manifested itself: guilt, death, and meaninglessness. And if we're able to in some way, and there's a strong and weak form of each of those, like, I nearly died is the weak form, the strong form is, I'm going to die, But if we're able to make peace with those, then there is no sickness. Then it is just pure gain. So that's what I want to say. It's not necessarily inherently bad. It's just how we relate to the lack or the gap or lack is maybe not the best word.
This podcast is sponsored by Phillips Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a theological school that offers Christian education in service of intelligent, just, and compassionate religious and civic communities. They welcome students to a safe space for truth-seeking conversation about the Bible, Jesus, and faithful living. They have on-campus and distance learning options. Go check them out at www.wherefaithleads.com.